Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for the man, the myth,
Enough.
the legend,
Enough.
Dave
Enough.
Nettle.
All right. So I am frequently asked, do you get nervous before these things? Usually not, but with this barbarian crowd, and the fact that now they've created a tripping hazard, which is great, and they've given me a device here that if I push the wrong button, the whole show goes back to zero. So, yeah, I'm a little nervous. We'll see how this goes. All right. So this is on Patagonia. Man, those bright lights. Not the company. This is actually the place down in South America. And, historically, I've tried to tie in a few fun images of skiing and so on. But for people that know me, climbing is really my passion. I'm a climber who skis, not the other way around. And so this is a little taste of the passion that I've enjoyed for close to 40 years in Patagonia. So I started... Those jeans are in fashion now, but that was actually that just happened when you didn't have money. But no, for me, I started climbing locally in Southern California at Joshua Tree, Talkeets, and Suicide Rocks. And then as I reached kind of my teenage years, I discovered Yosemite Valley. It was a magic place for me, and just instantly fell in love with climbing, and not just climbing, but climbing big, long routes. And Yosemite Valley is an amazing place as a training ground for a climber. And eventually I was drawn from the small crags to doing some of the walls on Half Dome and El Capitan. And Yosemite is also an amazing training ground for climbers as you begin your kind of journey in your local crags or in your local kind of area of climbing. And I really learned to how to survive on these big walls, multi-day climbs. Oftentimes the lessons were not very comfortable. This is an improvised bivouac on a rainy night on El Cap when we probably should have retreated. But you learn a lot of character. You gain a lot of character from these adventures. And also, a lot of the lessons were not necessarily gentle either. That's not actually my hand and my foot, but that was my partner's there. But this was after we climbed El Cap when we were teenagers and didn't know better. I think we had more skin in the game than skill. But somehow, over the years, kind of managed up through my early teens to scramble up a few of these climbs, get up some of the walls. And about this time, I saw a quote in one of the old Chenard catalogs. And it said, "Someday the Yosemite climber will take their skills on rock to the faraway high mountain ranges of the world." And oh my God, it just it captivated me. It just was like a calling. And from that point forward, that was kind of like a dream of mine, is to take this passion that I love to do and try to find places around the world where I could explore and check it out. And also take the skills that we learned in Yosemite, which were evolving quickly from big expeditions to light and fast on these rock walls, like here on the Drew in the Alps. An example with my buddy Reuben Shelton, instead of doing a couple of day ascent where we carried boots and crampons to get to the far side and walk off the back, we did it Yosemite style, where we ascended, got to the summit, and rappelled the entire route. Which a lot of the folks in Chamonix were saying nah, that's not how you do it here. But we got up and down in a day and missed a storm that probably would have caught us on the summit. So taking these tactics into places like the Alps and then up into places in Canada, the Bugaboos, one of the most amazing places, easy to access, and some of the biggest granite walls in North America. Those are the Hauser Towers there. Had a great opportunity to do the first one-day all-free ascent with my buddy Bean Bowers on a route all along the Watchtower. 33 pitches in an alpine. Really fun. Yeah, Bean. And with my buddy Paul Adams, one of the most elegant rock formations on Earth, the Lotus Flower Tower. You got to even love the name of this thing, up in the far northwest territories of Canada. And it began to expand into even further reaches. This is the Russian Tower in Kyrgyzstan that we had heard about, this amazing climb. And we found it hard to believe that what they were saying was actually true. But check this out. There was one section of the wall, an 800-foot continuous 510A hand crack, which if you're a climber, that means a lot. And it would be like the only reason why you would stop is because your belayer's like, that's it, it's my turn. You can't go any further. Place an anchor and bring me up. And just amazing adventures in these faraway places. And heading up into Greenland, into the Tassermute Fjord, doing some new routes on some of these crazy outback areas where you can only access with these fishing boats. So taking these Yosemite skills into the far ranges. And Baffin Island, again with my buddy Ruben, we climbed the Mount Asgard, these crazy cylindrical granite features in the amazing remote location, and then did a new route on Mount Loki as well. And some of these like deep in, long, faraway mountain ranges come with a certain cost as well. This one was hilarious after the fact. This was clear type 2 fun. We had these huge loads that we had to hike out, and Ruben still has a scar on his ass from this thing chafing him. Not that I personally check on it regularly, but it was great. You can see there we're in a bay, and we had been hiking for 3 days, and finally we got to where the boat could pick us up. And we get there, we drop the pack, and then the tide starts going out. Oh, man. So we pick up the packs, we hike another mile, set it down, the tide goes out. It ended up, because it was so shallow, 3 miles of up and down before we finally got to a point where the boat could pick us up. And I would say probably one of the greatest granite adventures I've been on is traveling to Pakistan. This was back in 2007. And this is just kind of a statement for the world, for all of us, because it's kind of always a crazy world. But in 2007, like the headlines on USA Today said, Pakistan, the most dangerous place on earth. And we traveled there and had the most amazing time. People were wonderful. It just shows that sometime you have to go there to really see what's happening. But this was Trango Tower. Oftentimes it's called Nameless Tower. And this was really putting our Yosemite skills to the test. Not only 4,500 feet of vertical granite, but doing free climbing and big wall at 20,000 feet was really a fun challenge. But the place throughout all these years that really has captivated me the most, and I can't even explain why, but it's drawn me back time and time again, is Patagonia. And sometimes just even now, just seeing that skyline, I'm just like, I gotta go. You forget about the weather or whatever, and it's so inspiring. So the first time I went down there, this was in 1990 with my buddy Jim Quirk here. He was actually working at Alpenglow Sports with me. That was one of my hiring tactics. I would kind of size up their retail experience and their potential climbing experience. You're hired. You want to go to Alaska? Anyway, we had a successful climb the year before on Mount Huntington. And so we were heading off to Patagonia. And this was crazy. I had been down to Argentina like about 6 years before, and you could live like a millionaire. But literally the week we got there, the Argentine peso crashed, and our money was almost worthless, US dollars. And we couldn't afford to take the taxi to the next domestic airport. And this one flight person just was super nice. He goes, just show up at midnight, we'll take care of you. And this is kind of like how life works. We ended up getting on a flight that was actually going to Australia. They stopped to fuel up, opened the door, rolled up a ladder, and we climbed out in the middle of the night. And that was, I accidentally pushed the button. But yeah, we somehow managed to make it work, and our adventure in Patagonia began. So once we got through the airfare, then we had some deluxe transportation accommodations here. And nowadays, the road to Chalten is paved. You can get there from Calafate in about an hour and a half or two. This took all day long. And we wondered why our seats were cheaper than anyone else's. It's because of where we were positioned. We were back in the meat locker, a little Cordero and Americano together. This is a very sensitive device here. We're going to make it work. Anyway, that was Patagonia. We're driving in on a dirt road. And, nowadays, the town is pretty big, but this was in 1990. Chaltén was founded in 1985, so there was only about 12 buildings, and these gauchos still owned huge ranches there, and we were able to hire them to hike our gear in with the horses into a place called Los Trancos, Piedra de Fraile. And I haven't been there recently. My buddy Andrew has, but this was what it looked like in 1990. And they would let little climbers kind of, hang out in that back little shed there and, kind of live like, elves in the side. You couldn't actually stay in the nice place. But we were psyched. We showed up and we started racking up, getting all excited. And then what Patagonia is famous for, it's bad weather, kicked in. And we were pretty much pinned down while rain, snow, and wind. You can see the look there. This was not something I had mentioned to him prior to the trip, that this was going to happen. One of the things that was the worst is at one point, we couldn't afford a lot of food, so we just bought a huge bag of rice. I mean, seriously, our budget was bad. And one night, we had this huge pot of rice. Jim was like seasoning it with pepper, and the lid came off, and the whole thing of pepper went in there. There's no way we were going to throw it out. So we used this big chunk of rice as our seasoning for the rest of the trip. You just, throw it on in there. Making things work. And the guy who was running it was this nice guy, a little bit of a loner, Ricardo. And I think he began to feel a little bit sorry for us. And at one point, he saw us waiting out the weather. And he's kind of like, I've got these 3 huge trees that have blown over. That I'm planning to spend all summer cutting. If you guys can even do a little bit of work, we would appreciate it. So anyway, Jim and I went to work. We did all 3 trees in a day and got into his good graces. And after that, we could hang out in his house. And he was making us these little cheese blintzes. So survival was assured. Well, eventually the weather does clear up in Patagonia, or at least get a little bit better, and we were ready to make our first try. And what we had come to climb, something that had, fired my imagination ever since I'd ever heard about it, was Fitzroy, which is one of the major peaks down there, one of the highest peaks. But specifically wanted to climb what was called the Super Couloir, or the Super Canaleta, a route on the far side of the peak that there were very few even photographs of it. There's no real good angle to get to take a picture. So it was a route that had only been climbed a couple of times. We had very little bit of information about it. And you have to climb up over this col and descend down into the far valley before even just getting to it. And what had started off as a nice day, by the time we got to the base of the couloir, the winds were blowing. We found a little crevasse that we were able to kind of dig a cave in. Spent the night inside the snow cave. It snowed about 2 feet that night. We just kind of popped out like a couple of little, groundhogs. And it was not happening. And it's so discouraging because at least with these tactics that we were doing back then, if you don't succeed, you've got to go all the way back down to the start and back down to Los Trancos where we're hanging out. I pushed the button. Look at the size of this thing. There are 4 buttons in this size, but they won't let me use my own clicker. I want my own clicker. All right, we're going to keep trying. We pivot with grace, which is like Patagonia. So the weather seems like it's going to clear up again, and we give it another shot. You can see the smile on Jim's face, like, we got this, man. We're going for it. And it was beautiful. We got over there with views of Cerro Torre. The scenery is remarkable. It's frightening and inspiring at the same time. And when you see a cloud like this, that's not a good sign. The aliens are coming. We figured that was going to happen, but we still went into our little hole. We enlarged it a little bit so we had a little bit more room. And I remember that night sleeping and just feeling this light little spindrift on my face, just almost gentle like, but that was like 15 feet under the snowpack. So by the time we got out the next day, it was a howling blizzard and more snow all the way back to Los Troncos. And it's a huge approach and a huge descent. But, we were fired up. And so we literally only had a couple of more days, and we had spent all day long. This is at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We only had 3 more days before we had to leave. And we were sitting there even planning like, well, we're not going to climb this thing. Maybe we could do some sightseeing in Buenos Aires or something. And all of a sudden it's like, what's that sound? I don't hear anything. Exactly, the wind. We thought the wind actually had died, but if you look at the trees, that's Patagonia, like kind of slipping into a gentle breeze. So we left at 5 o'clock in the evening. This time, a whole different strategy. No sleeping bags, no tent. We're going to try to go for the summit in a push. And so we approached all through the night, got to the base of the couloir, climbed the 2,000 feet of ice. You're imagining all these pictures that we couldn't take at that time. But finally, at dawn, we get up to the top of the couloir, and we're well on our way on the Super Canaleta. And the views, all of a sudden, it's like, this is the stuff that you remember about Patagonia. Looking across at that, the Helio ice cap that you rarely can see because it's almost always covered with clouds. And you can see the 2 borders of our couloir were just tucked into this icy little niche looking out on this amazing landscape. And finally, exiting out from the ice portion to the rock climbing, another 1,500 feet of rock climbing, but finally getting into the sun. But this was early too. Most climbers go down there between December and February. The only time we could get off because of the retail season here in Tahoe was October. So, yeah, the nice thing, there were no crowds because nobody else wanted to be there. Yeah, this is your classic rock climbing clothing here. But no, it was great. We finally started moving. We got into sync. And before long, come on, baby, we're moving up towards the summit ridge. Oh, yeah, fast forward. But in climbing this, it was so cold, we couldn't use rock climbing shoes. We were climbing in our old plastic double boots, which were amazing if you're edging, but not so good when you get on the friction slab. So this was some of the most challenging climbing that I had done to date. But finally, at just about 10 o'clock at night, we summited on the top of Fitzroy just as the sun was setting. Not the best time to be on a summit, but we were pretty psyched to be there. And the views looking across at Serratori, looking down on it now, and onto that ice cap, and the Pacific Ocean out there under clouds in the distance. Truly an amazing place to be. You look around, you take a deep breath, and then you're like, oh my God, we got to get off this thing. And I don't have a picture showing this, but at this time, climbers were trying to figure out ways to like lighten up the rappel equipment. And so we had our climbing rope, and then we had 160 feet of 5 mil Kevlar, which was the hottest thing. But it was kind of stiff. And I can remember we're right there in the middle, right at the beginning of what was going to end up being about 20 rappels. And I went to throw it, and it went about 2 feet up in a little ball and just fell at our feet. It was a long night. But we finally got off it. That's Fitzroy in the background. That left skyline is what we rappelled down. The super couloir is somewhere on the far backside. And this is a shot down there. You can't really see it, but that's Jim at the first open water that we had gotten to in a long, long time. This is, now we're probably at hour 30 or 35. And so what we would do is we would walk, we had to go completely around, it was about 25 miles completely around the park and back up the Rio Electrico in these plastic double boots. And every once in a while, Jim would like wake up and be like, where are the robots? And I'm like, what do you mean robots? And I think it was from the book he was reading, but he was dreaming that we were in this meadow and robots were walking around. So I think it was time to get back to base camp. When we got back to base camp, we were walking up to the little cabin with Ricardo, and he sees us, and he runs inside, and he comes out with this thing, and he had made us this cake, and that's supposed to be Fitzroy. And it might look like something else. Maybe that's a statement of how he felt about Americans, but that is Fitzroy. And And that was great because he was kind of a quiet guy, and he really warmed up to us. And this is what we looked like. We had been awake at this photograph for 64 hours. Perky. And so then we were ready to go. Look at that. This is what the old plastic double boots used to do to shins. But he was a trooper. And first experience in Patagonia, absolutely amazing. So that was in the fall of 1990. In 1997, I wanted to go back. And when you think of Patagonia, most people actually do think of like Fitzroy and Serratore in that area. But one of the other remarkable places is called Torres del Paine. It's a little bit further south in the country of Chile. And you fly down to Punta Arenas, you work your way up to Puerto Natales, and then you have a long drive into the park. And when I was there in 1997, they were just starting to pave the road. But instead of just paving sections at 2-lane, they paved it all with just one. So what would happen is when a car would come the other way, both cars would peel off to the side to pass, and it was like machine gun shots from all the gravel, which is why you had the Mad Max, chicken wire on the front of these buses. Pretty wild. So I had met John Leidick and Bean Bowers 3 years earlier in Bolivia. And to be honest, I had really bonded more with John. Bean was kind of this quiet guy. John, when I showed up, his back had gone out on him, and he couldn't join us. And this is like looking at Bean. This was like the first time I'd ever climbed with him. He's just like this guy just standing there like, who are you looking at, And I was like, oh my God, this is my climbing partner. And little did I know that this was going to end up becoming like not only one of my best climbing partners in life, but one of my best friends. And but that look on his face right there, but definitely determined. So we went into the park in Torres del Paine. We wrangled up a little gaucho and a horse that was a couple of horses that were going to help carry our gear in. And I'm going to get really brave here and try to use a pointer. That's what we're going to go climb right there. So the central tower of Paine had always been kind of considered like one of the holy grails of rock climbers in the Alpine. The British spent 30 days trying to climb it. Don Willens actually built these small little portable, almost like little hutch houses that they attached to the side of the wall. It was a big deal growing up reading about it. And our goal was to try to do it in a day. So here we are at base camp. All the junk gets thrown on out there. And we were enthusiastic. It had been a very wet, I'm going to try to reverse it, very wet, snowy year. There had been several expeditions that had been there for 3 or 4 weeks. Nobody had gotten even close to these climbs because of the amount of snow. And so on our first foray, literally like the day after we got there, was to go up and try to put some gear at the base of the route, just to kind of be in position. And this is something that is a great part of the history of climbing in Patagonia, partially because they just look crazy, but it also is a testament to how much free time climbers have on their hand down there. There are so many storm days that you're like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know, let's build a house. Why not? We should get good weather here in the next month. But these crazy little gnome-like houses have been built up all over. This was the one at the place they called the Japanese camp, which was a traditional high camp for the central tower. We actually stayed further down the valley. But they might look rustic on the outside, but in the inside, they're like a beautiful representation of a classic man cave. I mean, what else do you want? You got... Yeah, anyway. Yeah, pretty crazy what climbers do when they got a lot of time on their hands. So one of the days that we had while we were waiting for the weather to clear, I hiked up to the Lago Torre, which was on the opposite side of what we were going to climb. Our route, I'm going to venture on the pointer again, our route actually goes up the other side, joins up here, and climbs in this area. But this is one of the more stunning views of the Torres del Paine. And you have the south tower, the central, the north tower here that just stand like a fortress. Very inspiring if you're into that sort of thing. And this was our little house. The This was our little house here. I like the little carving on the door there. But this was at the right at the Tory camp where we spent a couple days kind of waiting for the weather to turn. Okay. We're going to get it. I swear I'm just touching it lightly. All right, so I actually used to keep a journal. That used to be kind of fun. And in Patagonia, you ought to because you got the time to do it. You could actually write a novel on the bad days. But this picture is kind of interesting because I woke up in the morning. This was day 4. So we had just arrived. All the other climbers who were there had been there for almost a month. And I'm like, let's just take our gear and try to get it to the col, to the place where the technical climbing starts. I mean, why don't we just check it out and see? So this was at 8 o'clock in the morning, not what you'd consider a classic alpine start. The weather didn't look great. It was actually lightly raining when we left, but we had our climbing gear. We had stashed a little bit of it up the valley already, and we just started hiking up the valley, went up the approach couloir, and got this view. And this is what we're planning to climb here. And you can see the wind just ripping over the summit. It's still coated in ice and snow from the last storm. But again, we were not going expecting to climb this on this day. We were just kind of going to go up and, kind of kick the tires. And so we climbed up. It's messing with me here. We climbed up this mixed section of rock and ice up to an appropriately called, and I'm not making this up, this is called Cold Bitch. I think it's actually named after somebody. It's B-I-C-H. But by the time you get there, you're like, because you're going through mixed climbing and the whole bit. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe I need to point this somewhere else. And we had a half a liter of water, a half a packet of crackers. You can see them in there, and a little chub of salami. We were just up there for the day, and I looked out, and I saw it starting to clear a little bit. And I look at B, and I'm like, this is our day. And he's like, no. And can you read what it says on his helmet? We're not in Kansas anymore. It's awesome. And I'm like, exactly. I'm like, you just have to jump on these things. We're going to give it a try. Uh-oh. Are you giving me a pointer? A different one. Okay. Does it work? Okay.
Forward, back.
Oh, wow. The other one, anyway, you get the idea here. We're going to make this work. And I haven't fallen off the platform yet. So we started climbing, and, the idea was we'll just go until we get turned back, but we're not going to turn back. And so we just kind of kept going. Great climbing, this beautiful golden granite. And I'm not sure if you can see that huge thing on the back of Bean. That's a backpack loaded with all sorts of crap that we had brought. It's like our boots, crampons, and we were starting to move a little slow. I was leading the route, and so what we began to do, because we knew we were going to rappel the same route that we were going up, we began leaving things behind, like a little, treasure hunt. So it's these boots, we're not going to need them. We'll hang them here. We don't need the crampons. We really don't need this jacket. And so the whole route was littered with our belongings. But we got lighter and faster, so we began to work. And the views were amazing. This is a clear day in Patagonia, by the way. So we were pretty excited. And what I saw that made a difference was that the clouds were not sitting on the glacier. They had risen up. Usually that's a tip that you've got at least a day or a half a day before the storm really sets in. That's an optimistic look. And notice it's still light outside, and he's got his headlamp on. He goes, we're doing this, right? And I'm like, yeah, get your headlamp on. We're not turning back. And so the route went from the nice sunny side and kind of wraps you around, and now we were into some kind of mixed rock and snow, but our boots and crampons were 1,000 feet below, scattered on the route. So this became exciting. Kicking steps with the little rock climbing boots. And I remember one particular time where I had run out of rope. I couldn't move. I knew I was at the end of the belay. I couldn't hear him. The wind was blowing. And he was jumaring at this point, basically hanging on the rope climbing. And I just wedged into the chimney. I'm like, you're on belay, you're good. And I just like, did the ab crunch. I don't think I could belay him now. But he got up, and at first I didn't feel the weight, then it got heavier. Then at some point I said, stop. He goes, what's up? I go, we really don't have any protection between us. And he's like, all right. Everything was covered in ice. But we finally reached the summit sometime in the middle of the night. I don't even remember. But an awesome, amazing experience. The first climb to do. He's like, who the hell is this I'm climbing with? This is that moment where a person decides, I want to do something with this guy all the time, or like, as soon as we get down, we're done. I think he's still deciding there. So the storm began to hit, and what's wild is literally when we were on the summit, we could look down in that long valley you saw where we were booting up. We could see a long string of headlamps of all these people, all these climbers. There was like 5 different expeditions that had been waiting a month. And they're coming up the valley with these little headlamps. But by then it was too late. The storm was rolling in. It was starting to snow and blow. So even to rappel off, we didn't use a 2-rope system. We kept 1 rope in reserve because every time we rappelled, the ropes were just getting blown around. And one of the most amazing things that I think I've ever seen on a mountain at sunrise, it's this blood red sunrise, and I had lowered Bean down to Coal Bitch. And at that point, we kind of felt like we had it. We were off the technical stuff. He had dropped to his knees, and he was just like laid out like this, and the wind and the snow was blowing from his back where it was still dark. And so it looked like thousands of red sparks were just flying off his body into the void. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. My partner's disintegrating in flames. But like I mentioned earlier, this actually was the beginning of an incredible dynamic duo. He and I went on to climb many great things, and actually another climb in the show here. And so we get back to base camp, and there was an Italian expedition. These 5 guys, they had been there for a month. They hadn't climbed anything. And we show up, and this guy was great. You know, he's got the cigarette hanging there, and he's holding this little thing. He's like, you've been here 5 days. I've been here 3 weeks, and all I've done is carve this little sugar ball. You know, something, a little sugar bowl to hold things. But it was great. They ended up cooking us this huge Italian dinner. The wine was flowing. And at some point at that night, we have no idea, but at some point that guy who had done all that had used, like made this little homemade wood burning kit, something to hang up in the man cave there at the cabin. So very cool. So after that trip with Bean, he and I actually had done a couple other trips to Alaska, done some mountaineering, some big wall climbing. But there was something that was on both of our lists in Patagonia that we really wanted to do, and that was Ceratory. It's like when you see it, you've seen some pictures of it up there, you see it and it's like, it's thrilling, it's terrifying, it makes you want to climb, it makes you want to wish you were never a climber, it evokes all emotions. So in 2002, in December of 2002, headed back down to attempt Ceratory with Bean. So this is heading on in, and things are different now. You kind of base your camp right in town in Chalten, but back then you would hike in and set up a base camp back in the back country. And again, climbers with time on their hands had created this little thing, and this was going to be our home for, ended up being about 3 weeks. And we actually stayed in tents, but you would hang out inside there. But it was nice. And at this point, I was feeling pretty comfortable with the vibe in Patagonia, the challenges. And this is kind of just normal. You get down there and the weather turns bad and you wait, or you move up the valley a little bit. In this case, we racked up and decided, even though the weather wasn't good, we can get our equipment a little bit closer. Every little step helps. And this was kind of a wild thing. They have this rope, the little Tyrolean system, set up to get across the outflow of the Lago Torre here that you just traverse across. And even though it's pretty bomber, it's still spooky because if it were to fail, it would not go well for sure. And you got your pack hanging off you and everything. And then it's a long kind of circuitous hike over eroded trails and landslide area before you finally get onto the glacier. And the glacier is just riddled with these little like mini streams. that you definitely do not want to slip into because they kind of go like a little luge and then they disappear down into these moulins, these holes that just drop off into the middle of nowhere. So we hiked our gear up, got rained out, and this is another thing that you do, when you're just hanging around at base camp, just trying to stay fit and watching the weather, waiting for that break. And so this might be a good time. Is there a pointer on this thing? The little top one? I don't want to reset the whole thing. So anyway, the route that we were going to attempt, this is a good picture to show it, basically comes from the valley, up around the backside, joins a shoulder, up the ridge, up here. Hello. Somewhere up there. You're just like, yeah, let's hang out here a little longer and wait. But after that first storm, some fresh snow, but we decided to push up to what was going to be our high camp. It's called the Norwegian camp. We don't know why. There were no Norwegians there. But we set up a tent, got it sorted. But again, the weather, the winds, like this picture doesn't really capture it, but this is probably 80 mile an hour winds that just rip down the valley and can literally knock you off your feet. So back to the little camp down there in the trees. And it was close enough to town where you could actually make runs to town, pick up fresh supplies if you wanted to. And a whole cast of characters would come through, either trekking, hiking, other climbers. It's kind of a social thing, everybody hanging out down there. And you're waiting and watching. And sometimes right when you think that you're getting a little bit of a break and the snow is melting off what you plan to climb and the weather starts looking good, then it completely changes and it starts snowing and the snow level comes way down low and you're like literally back to zero. And you just have to maintain just that optimistic feel like we're just going to hang out and keep loving it. This is Patagonia. This is what we signed up for. But eventually things clear and you get this amazing view and inspiring view. And it's like, all right, let's head on back up there. Again, another fresh coating of snow and heading up towards the Norwegian camp. It had snowed so much that all the open running water that we had had before, just little trickles, were all frozen and covered. So this is just like the innovative way we would get water because we had to really conserve our fuel. You just throw slush against the rock, and as it would melt, it would drip into different bottles and stuff. Definitely, you just figure out all this stuff on the fly. I don't think that's in any like how-to guidebook. So this is our little Norwegian camp where we had the little small bibbler tent set up that was going to be our base. And just when we thought that we had a break, again, this is not a cloud you want to see in Patagonia. The winds came up and the weather came in, and we were chased all the way back down. It's really wild to try to keep your motivation. So a few days before New Year's Eve on 2002, we got what looked like a clearing, and we said, whole new strategy. No sleeping bags. Again, we were just going to do kind of the thing we did on the central tower and just go super light, get to our tent, just sit in there, stay as warm as we can, and then make a dash for it. But the idea was being able to do this long approach hike without heavy packs to stay fresh. And this is crazy. There's still a ton of clouds, but the climber only sees the blue sky. It's like, oh man, we're good. We got it. Isn't that what we're supposed to climb though in the clouds? No, but to see the blue sky? But we were very motivated. So we got to the tent pretty early on and then kept going. And this is now we're on new terrain. Heading on up towards the climb, and now we're getting into the meat of it. The first 1,000 or so feet are up some nice steep ice, and then crazy mixed climbing where you're going from ice back to rock, and so you're keeping your crampons on, and this is just to get to the base of the climb. By the time we got up to what they call the shoulder, the weather was kind of moving in. We were able to dig a little hole and crawl down into a crevasse there. And the idea, we had taken a stove so we could melt snow for water. That was the one thing we didn't want to carry a lot of weight. You actually get a lot of water weight out of just one fuel canister. And so we didn't have any bivvy equipment. We were just going to hang out here, melt some water, and try to make a dash for it. But here he is crawling out of it after another fresh 1.5 feet of snow and just howling winds. So this was wild. It was very disappointing having to hike back down. We were thinking that we were going all the way back down to the forest to our base camp. Huge amount of energy. And we get back to the Norwegian camp here. Again, we didn't have sleeping bags. At this point, we didn't have any food left. It was a one or done shot. But we were going to spend the night in the tent and then hike back to base camp the next morning. We're sitting in there shivering, just sitting on top of our ropes, huddled up. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I look out and there's stars. And I'm like, no. Yes. And I'm like, no food, no water, but we've got a good idea on the route. It's now. We got to do this. And so middle of the night, we rally up and we go for it, following our footsteps from the day before. So we were able to make good time. Watching the sunrise as we're gaining the shoulder, made much better time, and racking up now for the basically the ascent of the main Serratori rock. And you can see here a little bit icy, a little crusty, not your ideal Yosemite conditions, but amazing views that made it worthwhile. And you can see here that the weather was actually clearing. We were getting our break. Okay. Oh. All right. And so as you can see, we're rapidly moving up the climb. And that's how it was in real life. And I've got to say, the exposure was absolutely amazing. And so we would lead in blocks. In other words, I would lead 5 pitches, then Bean would lead 5 pitches, and just some of the rock climbing. Now we're in our rock shoes that we carried with us before we got to the ice sections. And this is a great shot looking across at Fitzroy, the super couloir. You can't see it, but it runs up that face right up the middle there. And it was wild just kind of looking across it, the rarely seen side of Fitzroy. And a lot of people think of Serratori as a rock climb, but at least the year that we did it, there was a lot of ice climbing up through these chimneys and gullies that had been rock and that were just covered with this crazy hollow rime ice. Very difficult to protect. And finally getting high enough up where we got that view into that helio ice cap again. And the mixed climbing. And that was something that I had had a lot more experience in. Bean at this point. He ended up becoming a master on ice. But these were my pitches leading through these like narrow things. And even though this doesn't look like much technically, where I'm belaying, this was the weirdest brown ice. It was like boogers that had blown against the rock and frozen. And this was the scariest section of the whole thing because every time you'd move, you'd start to slide. And just, but anyway, managed to get through that. And then it was Bean's turn to kick in. And this section of Serratori now, the main face, is like one of the prized free climbs of top-end climbers. But at this time, it was just every crack was covered with ice or filled with ice. And so here he is, a combination of free climbing and aid climbing, mixed rock, ice. He's got his crampons on. Not that that's ideal for rock climbing, but they edge really well. And it was just really hard to work our way up through this stuff. And again, it was going to be one of those long nights. This is sun setting on Fitzroy with the shadow of Serratori against it. A beautiful sight, but also kind of like time for the headlamps. And so this is at some point crazy in the night, probably about 11 o'clock at night, nearing the summit. And this crazy device here is a very controversial thing. An Italian climber, Maestri, because people had challenged the fact that he had actually climbed it the first time, said, well, I'll prove that I did it. I'm going to go back and climb it again. But this time he took a huge compressor that would fit on his back, and it was a compressor drill, and he drilled bolts up this thing. Apparently got at or near the top, doesn't matter. and then just decided to leave it there. So this is like one of the belay stations. You actually like are standing on this relic of history. Crazy. And Serratori is famous for its ice cap at the top. Like, you never really see rock on the top, and sometimes the ice cap is 100 feet, sometimes it's 150 or 50, but it's this foamy stuff that's very difficult to climb. But to really say you got to the summit, you got to climb up this stuff. You can't place any protection, and you're just kind of dancing up this foam. And finally, at pretty much midnight on December 31st, 2002, that's my 45th birthday right there, baby. Woo! Yeah. You can see what's happened in the years since the Central Tower. Beans looks a little happier on the summit. He's become a seasoned alpinist at this point. And rappelled down all through the night. The wind was blowing, the ropes were getting stuck, all the fun things that happened in Patagonia. But it was just beautiful, just taking your time. And a combination of leaving some equipment behind and using some of this ancient junk. Like, you've got everything here from, like the little bolts, old rusted wires. You've even got a wooden peg with a shoelace tied on it. So no one piece is actually worth anything. But by combining 10 pieces of junk, you've created a life support system. All right. And then back down into the Bridwell camp, just loving it. And we ended up having such good weather that we went on to actually climb another peak while we were down there and did a new route on Saint Exupéry, one of the other spires. But at that point, you love Patagonia, but at some point, enough is enough. 2 summits for that trip, and we headed on out. All right, we're getting there. So this was one of the unusual trips. It was the first time I'd really gone on a major climbing trip solo, where I was just planning to meet up with people. And again, heading back down to Los Glaciares, which is where Fitzroy and Serratori are. But there's lots of other peaks, towers to climb. Again, the road hadn't been paved yet, but instead of rutted dirt, now it had more of that gravel. And so again, you can see the Mad Max screen to protect the windshield. And no matter how many times you see it, that as you're approaching from Calafate and you see that beautiful Patagonian skyline, you just kind of get that feel inside you. So Bean was down there and invited me down there to stay. This was a little house that he had actually purchased down there. He became pretty much like a resident in Chalten with his wife, Helen. They were going to be climbing. And so I'm like, well, I need a partner. And they're like, well, we could probably find you something that will do. So they found me this hardcore seasoned Argentine girl. She was a guide down there, but guiding for trekking. This is Cecilia, and she had never gone on a big climbing trip like this before. So I was definitely psyched. You could see what she lacked in experience, she was making up in enthusiasm. So across the river, just pulling yourself across there. She was getting her workout. And then up through the glacier, very similar approach that we did to Serratori. And this is, I think, when the reality set in, So we were going in to climb a peak called Rafael. It's not one of the biggest ones, but it has some great technical climbing. And my Spanish is not very good, and her English was almost nothing. So it was kind of fun hanging out in a little mini bivvy tent, trying to figure out what do I want to say to her. Hand me that book. She's like, oh, really? Came back with a response, no. Universal language, by the way. So we started up Rafael, having a great time. Views looking straight across at Serratori, where I'd been a few years earlier. Magnificent place. And here she is, enthusiastic. We're switching the boots and crampons for the climbing shoes you can see her holding. So we've done the approach on ice, and now we've got about 10 pitches of beautiful rock climbing on Rafael. Wide open stuff. This is a great shot. She's like, so what do climbers eat? And I said, well, sometimes energy food like this. And she's just like, I'm not eating this. Argentines don't eat this kind of stuff, so not really sold on the goo. And finally getting up high enough on Rafael where we could look down to Lago Sucia, one of the beautiful lakes that you can trek to if you go to Los Glaciares. It's one of the more stunning locations to hike to. And as we got higher up, definitely became a little more serious. And, just a huge day, a huge challenge for her, but we were having a great time. And the final pitches up towards the summit. And definitely psyched. This was kind of her first big Patagonia climbing experience and super stoked. And then the long descent down in the late afternoon. Even though things can be cold there, you can also get this crazy isothermic heat that just turns the snowfields into mush and just wading down through this stuff for miles. And then back to camp. So this is what I was expecting to get in Patagonia. This is Manu, another guy that they hooked me up with, and we ended up having a great time. We hiked up up the Rio Electrico, pretty much the same approach for the Super Cool War on Fitzroy, but to climb these lesser peaks, but beautiful rock climbs. We've got Guigemay and Mermoz, and if I could do the little pointer thing here somewhere, we've got Guigemay, Mermoz, and then that's Fitzroy off in the background. So just a stunning location with some great, and on a day like this, with this photograph, even I think, God, maybe I'll go back. It looks really nice. So the climbing was fun. There was some technical stuff. This climb gets done a lot over the years. You can see the collection. You've got all the different eras. You got wood from like the 1600s. You've got pitons for, anyway, you've got the whole collection there. And same thing, just remarkable steep climbing in the surrounding background that really makes it feel different than any other place on earth. And Manu, just psyched. He was actually a climbing guide in Chalten, and he had never summited any of these peaks. So for him, this was just a really huge experience to stand on the summit. Yeah. And the panorama from the top. I left the food up to him. I'm not sure what we're having for dinner that night. But he looks pretty inspired. So, yeah, exactly. Those look great when they're like hovering over Reno, but in Patagonia, it's got a little different story. But, we felt like we had maybe one more day of weather before it came in. So we got a nice early start and headed on up towards Mermoz, which was actually the longer and more technical of the two climbs. Okay. So we approached rapidly from the snowfield across the slabs. And this is your Patagonia power bar right there. Yeah, big old chunk of bread, some just greasy, fatty salami, and then a big chunk of cheese in there. That's all you need for a climb. So on Mermoz, one of the first sections is this like 300-foot like chimney crazy thing that you're trying to climb, but you can't use all the footholds because the whole back is just smeared with this old ice. So definitely very, very challenging. And steeper climbing, but beautiful crack climbing in a wild setting. And up near the summit, some traversing with the wind just howling over the top. You can see the clouds are starting to set in. The climbing weather is about to shut down. Our timing is just barely slipping it in there. And Manu, again, he had never summited these peaks in his own backyard. So climbing the top there. And here we are, super psyched. There's your mustache shot. There you go. That is, it just grew straight out. I don't know. But we're psyched. So as we were rappelling down, it was actually kind of interesting. He pointed over to this, this beautiful spire, Poinsonat, and said, "Have you climbed that?" And I'm like, "No." And he goes, "Oh, you should come back and climb that." And so about, I guess 7 years later, Aaron Zanto and I, and a lot of you guys know Aaron, super, super great guy, climbing partner of mine, ski partner, headed down, spent a day in Buenos Aires, just kind of hydrating after the long flights. And times had changed. Instead of hiking up into these high camps and living in these little hovels, what you would do is you would stay in town in Chalten. We actually rented this little room out for the whole time, even though there were times when we wouldn't even be in it. But we had like a little custom base camp. And then you would hike out of town and set up a high camp, and that was your jumping off point. And Aaron's great, man. This guy is like a food machine. And so we would be hiking through town, and we would stop at the first bakery, and he would buy like 6 empanadas for lunch, right? And I'm like, all right, and I got a couple, walk through town. About 3 blocks later, his 6 were gone. We'd stop in another shop, he'd buy 6 more empanadas, and this would proceed till we got to the outskirts of town. It was awesome. So hiking on up into the Los Glaciares, and there's actually a better way to get up here. My buddy Jeff and Matt, my buddies here, we found the better way when we were there this last month. But at that time, this was the way to go, crossing the creek. And we were heading in to climb De la Esse, which is this peak in the distance. One of the smaller ones, but still a couple thousand feet of beautiful rock. And that was going to be kind of our warm-up climb for Point Sinat. And this is Lago Sucia, and amazing spot. Everywhere you looked was a beautiful scene. Almost everywhere. That was one of those sneak photos Anto got. So the next day, heading on up, beautiful approach, Point Sinat and Fitzroy in the background, and then heading across the glacier. The peak we're climbing is the one on the left there. Again, just beautiful setting, gorgeous day. We had great, great weather. I knew it. Great climbing. And so we were actually there. There were a couple other parties climbing it. And that's pretty much a reality nowadays in Patagonia. If it's a beautiful day, you're not the only one taking a jump on it. And so we actually ran into a couple other teams climbing this. But again, mixed climbing, crampons, and the final rock ridge up to the top, looking over the top towards Serratore. And Patagonia was big on Aaron's list. It was something that he had always wanted to do. And there's another classic view of Patagonia when it happens. And so, you know, there's things you can do in Chalten when it's stormy out. So we hung out, waited a couple of days, and then things got beautiful again. And so again, with the pointer, just to give you an idea, we're basically hiking up, climbing around, and this is what we're climbing here. And that's Fitzroy that I'd been on before. Just stunning spires. So we were hiking on up. This was like an old cabin that is now kind of like a historical, they've got it preserved, but it's with, again, some old climbers had actually in town had these hinges forged out of like horseshoes and odds and ends. Just really pretty history in this area. Lago de los Tres, and now you're heading into the remote area beyond this point. So that's usually, most people in this room, when you see a sign like that, you know you're getting close to where you want to be. But beautiful lake, and we traversed around to another upper lake, and there were actually even some fixed ropes climbers had left during this, and it doesn't really seem like you might need it here, but if it's raining and windy and snowy, you want to have something to hang on to, although the condition of the rope is a little questionable at times. So we set up our little base camp, our high camp, I should say, by this little lake. Gorgeous spot, looking up towards Fitzroy, and then checking out the weather. We really hadn't planned. We knew the weather was going to be coming in, so we were just really planning to drop our gear off and sunset on Point Sinat. Gorgeous time. So the weather did come in. We went all the way back down. This is a little view of Chalten, circa 2017. It's even busier now. And something that I'd never had before were these like multi-model weather reports. Usually you would just kind of keep going up and down until you got lucky. Now you actually had some technical information. And so what we were looking at is, we're over here, I think. Forget it. You get the idea. that we were about to run into this huge weather event that was going to go for a couple of days. And then the idea is not to wait till Tuesday to start going climbing, but to start hiking in on Monday. So just as you get there, that weather is going to be broken. And you can see you've got a one-day window. It's not a whole lot. So, there's things you can do to train in the meantime. And waiting for that weather to peak and then start hiking in. We actually started hiking in on this day. This was just as that last bit of weather was rolling through. Just trying to be confident in the forecast. Oh, I think I got a double click coming. Yes, no? Okay, and so we've got up there and now heading up for the ascent. Just beautiful sunrise. And there was another team that had actually sat out the storm the whole time, and they were just ahead of us. You can kind of see their footprints in the distance. We're going to need to reinvest in clickers. I know it's going to be another double here. No. And so we ran into them, we caught up with them, and they were like, we're out of here. We think the weather's turning bad. I go, well, in Patagonia, it's always turning bad. It's just how soon. But for some reason with the clouds, and there's so many good excuses that you can come up with that actually make sense, but they ended up leaving. And when we saw the winds kicking around them, there was a little part of us that were actually kind of envious that they were going to be back in town. But we were heading on up to give it a shot while the weather held. Crazy climbing, just even getting to the start of it. This wild traverse with this kind of foamy ice snow that you couldn't protect. This is where total confidence in your partner, because this is a no-fall situation. And this is where having formed partnerships and friendships really pay off on these far, away mountain ranges in the world, for sure. You can almost see the relief on his face. There's like 3 cams jammed in the rock. It's like there are certain points on any climb where you go, no matter what happens, I'm not getting below this. Like, this is going to hold. And this was one of those belays. You could see that ice sheet that we had climbed up the whole time was just really sketchy. Mm-hmm. And so heading on up. But super psyched. So now we're nearing the top of the ice section, and I had basically led the ice section. I'm at the top now, and looking down at Lago Sucia, across at Serratori. We're high enough where we get that view, and now Xanto is kicking into high gear. So the way we had it figured is I would lead these ice pitches, and he would lead the rock pitches in 2 big long blocks. And he just took off and made us proud. So now we've got about 1,000 feet of rock climbing between 5'8", 5'9", and then a lot of mixed wandering. And finally reaching the top of Point Sinat on a gorgeous afternoon. Super psyched. Yeah, what happened to the mustache? So, very quick story. In 2005, I was skiing on Castle Peak with Bonnie Zellers, and it was coated with ice, and it was miserable. And I was like, man, this is miserable. And she goes, why don't you just shave it off? And I was like, okay. I had people threaten me, offer to pay me, dare me. No way. But she was just like, just shave it off. And it's never come back. So here, standing on the very tip top of Point Sinat, and it was wild, looking across at Fitzroy, where I'd been with my buddy Jim Quirk 30 years earlier. Come on, I know you're there. And the summits in Patagonia, they don't give you a lot of time to hang out and, have a picnic lunch. Usually something like this is rolling in, and it's time to get down. And it's going to be a long night. We reached the summit there at, probably about 9 o'clock at night. It stays light, very late there. And then it's the long rappel back down. Just wild exposure. And at this point, you're tired. you just want to get down and you're cold, but man, you just got to keep it together. You can kind of see that cloud in the background. It's like the red lit alien flying saucer ready to transport us. That pretty much sums it up. Huge, huge day for us. And much better the next morning back at camp. Arrived there at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and very happy to just know that it's done and a cup of coffee. And back in Chalten, celebrating with an appropriate titled bottle of wine, the high summits. So, to be honest, after I climbed Point Sonat, I think I just turned 60, and I was kind of thinking, I might be done with Patagonia. Places like the Dolomites and Sardinia and Corsica are starting to sound a lot better. But it took my buddy Andrew Osterreicher, who's sitting in here, another culprit who I've climbed with, go like, hey, you want to go to Patagonia? And I went, yes. Wait, what did I say? So there was a place that I hadn't been that I wanted to go in Torres del Paine, up the French Valley. And this is a kind of inspiring day. You can see the towers off in the distance as we're driving from Argentina to Chile. We arrived in Puerto Natales, and instantly there was just like the worst weather that you could imagine. In Puerto Natales, they actually have a statue that celebrates the high wind. These are people hanging on for dear life. It's like, yes, well, here you are in Patagonia, embrace the wind. Well, when we arrived, this was what was on our little weather report. Not an ideal thing if you're thinking about going climbing. So we put off our even going into the park for a couple of days and just said, let's just hang out here in Puerto Natales and just wait it out. And we each had our own little like mini apartment loft, and the whole wall was just this giant window, and you felt like you were like in bed going through a car wash. The rain and the wind was just blowing for like 2 days, but we were glad that we put that off. So it gave us a chance to kind of like work on our dietary needs. Andrew's another one of those like food monsters. He just keeps eating. That's like just a small snack for him there. And you can tell that he's really got a different approach on technical climbing food. And I think it's great. Like, there's probably like no food value in those cheese puffs. But when he finally got him to base camp, I'm like, can I have some? He's like, yeah, okay. This was something that Patagonia has changed. It used to be that you just hang out in like a tent, and now you go to a groovy coffee shop and have a cinnamon roll. So it's certainly got a lot more civilized since the 90s. Well, waiting paid off, and the weather got good, and this is our approach to Torres del Paine. And the valley that we're heading into is this valley up here, the French Valley. Absolutely stunning. Our first challenge, though, was just getting through the paperwork. We thought we just had to bring one copy of the permit. We show up, and we're on a time constraint to get to a boat ferry by a certain time. And they informed us, oh, no, you need this in triplicate. And we're like, no way. But fortunately, our friend who did a lot of our arranging our logistics here, Anais, she helped us out, was great, interpreting, got everything, and we were able to get on the ferry boat. And we had hired 3 porters to help us carry gear in. And as you can see here, this is a little bit different than the amount of tourism that was happening in Chalten in 1990. It is definitely a lot of people are visiting these beautiful places, and you can't blame us, Some of the trekkers don't even have to carry a tent. You just rent them. They're already set up. This is like a little tent village and part of the trekking. But, it gets you into an amazing place, and this is where we're heading. The Vallée Française to the Britannico camp down there at the bottom. And there's Andrew. And this is the start of the French Valley, and you can see that there had just been a wintry storm, probably that big system that moved in, but we were psyched. We were just going to get on in there. Porters were indispensable. They helped drop off a lot of our gear. We were planning to stay in there for about 7 to 10 days. And so we were able to head on in. And instantly we got there and we were psyched. And so without like really even hesitating, we decided to like hike up into the upper Valley Francais and drop off our equipment. And this was a way we found first. You always find the better way later, but this was definitely a refreshing way to get up there. And the upper French Valley is gorgeous. Beautiful place, lots of granite. And we had our first view of what we came to climb, the shark fin, the Alita di Tiburon. And this is the formation here. And the route basically follows up the face and this wild arête to the summit here. It's another view of it. So we spent our time we dropped the gear off. That was our plan. The weather wasn't ideal. It was still a little rainy and cold. There was still some snow up on our route. So we came back down and just spent a couple days getting base camp set up. If any of you guys are backpackers, you know you have to hang your food to keep it away from bears. So we did that here. It seems low, but in Patagonia, the wind is so high that over the centuries, the bears from crouching in the wind have gotten so small that they actually can't reach those bags. So we were good. Here's Andrew, like taking, count of his technical climbing food. This is his secret weapon. Specifically, high in calories, high in sugar. Like, yeah, this is what you need. And, I was kind of teasing him about it. And then, this is what I had, oatmeal, inedible. I'm like, pass the gummy bears. And again, you never know with the weather. We've had this storms that came in, snow line came all the way down to our camp, and then everything got reset back again and waiting. You can see there, that's our route, completely covered in snow and ice. So it's not just waiting for the next good day. You have to wait for a good day with wind to clear off the snow and ice, and then you need the good day to climb. But eventually, it happens. There's a couple of solar panels soaking up the sun. You almost don't want to have an inReach. You're like, maybe it'll say sunny. Nope, heavy rain. Well, maybe the winds will die down. No, not really. Maybe we'll play more cribbage. Or just drink coffee and camp and stay warm. But finally, the sun came out. The wind, which works against you, also works for you. It blows a lot of the snow off the rock. And it seemed like it was going to be go time. Our gear was already up there. Andrew had actually hiked in a second day and bumped it up right to the base of the route. So we just had super light packs, and our plan was to do it in a long day. We also found a little drier way to cross the creek. And through these beautiful lenga tree forests and up into the upper French Valley with the cathedral, the peak called the Cathedral in the back, and the shark fin on the right. And just some of the stuff, you go to these wild places and everything is like you're looking at these grand, huge vistas and stunning peaks, but there's so much like little small details that you see in the rocks and the plants on these voyages too. I thought this was like almost like an artwork done here just with on one of the small rocks. So we finally got up to the base of the shark fin, and the weather was good, but the wind was howling and it was freezing. So it was frustrating to be right there ready to go, and it was literally too cold to even stand up. The wind was just howling so bad. But the wind began to drop down, and more importantly, the sun finally came out, and it was like, all right, now we're ready. And so now we just started up the route. It's about 12 pitches, about 1,200 feet of granite climbing. A little bit low angle in the front. You can see the glaciers in the background. Again, that kind of stunning wild setting that you're climbing in Patagonia. And up to little pockets of sun always just felt so good. And even some really technical sections. This one section we came up to, this beautiful 5'9" hand crack that just split this head wall like little treats. How about that? Okay, we'll try that. And not only good crack climbing, but these wild, smooth granite slabs as well. We had been told to be heads up. It was kind of run out. There's not a lot of protection on the route. But this was our style of climbing. This was this climbing we'd been doing on granite in Yosemite and throughout the Sierra for decades. There's Andrew, super fired up to be where he is in Patagonia, climbing in sunlit rock. And some of the rock was pretty steep and shattered, and then you would go through a roof, and then it would be low angle. And it finally led up to this traverse that brought us around to the true final summit ridge that we had been looking at from camp. Super fired up. And that's heading up towards the to the sub-summit there. And you can see the clouds are coming in. The clock is ticking on the weather, but we're having a great day. And this is looking down at Andrew on the ridge from near the summit. The summit was so small that we couldn't both climb up to it at the same time. So we took turns leading up and then down climbing, then switching and leading up. And there's Andrew taking his turn up to the top. And just, you can kind of see him there. It's a little dark in the background, but literally just enough to balance on top of the summit of the shark fin. Absolutely stunning. And those are definitely some happy summit smiles. Again, you see a cloud like that, it's time to get off the summit for sure. And you could feel and hear the wind begin to pick up as it was kind of just racing across the summits there. So we descended down the kind of the northwest face, I'd say about 8 to 10 rappels, and descended down onto the far side, this little snowfield glacier area, and then just punching our way back down. And by the time we got to base camp, it was full on raining. The shark fin was covered with clouds, and we had just snuck it in. You can see the rain on the tent. It just basically, we hiked in and just threw our packs in there as it just started to downpour. The timing was just right. A short trip, an awesome trip, great friendship, success. We'd, manage to sneak on in there and climb this beautiful peak. The Alita di Tiburon. Yeah. 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 All right. You don't want to clap for that one. So the Lionel Terray, one of the greatest French alpinists of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, wrote that when a climber begins his life, he kind of starts his climbing close to home, on the home crags, and begins to hone his craft there. We'll see how this works out. This is also a good historic piece. We've got the tube socks and the short shorts. But no, you kind of cut your teeth on the home crags. But he says that when you get into the prime of your life, when you feel your strength and your skill and your boldness, you begin to seek the far, mountain ranges, and you want to push yourself and find new challenges, whether it's in mountaineering or in alpinism. Come on, work with me here. I'm trying to wrap this up. And so kind of like I said, in the prime of your life, he says, go out there and seek these wild, crazy things. And then as you get older, you begin to return back to the places that you love, the crags that you're familiar with, those slopes. It's kind of like the arc of a rainbow. And, it's kind of interesting. So the question people ask is will you return to Patagonia? And for me, I see pictures like this, and of course, I think absolutely, there's a million great reasons to want to go back to this beautiful wild place. But there's also memories that are still lingering that make you realize that you pay a high price for it. But, my feeling is whether it's Patagonia or some other crazy wild mountain range, as long as I can, my plan is to not rush towards that tapering off at the end, but to resist it as long as possible. And, with good friends, with my passion for climbing and skiing, to always kind of go out there and take what I love into those far mountain ranges of the world. And that's it. Thank you.